What if you had gotten the call? Would you have gone? And
probably not, because at that time in my life, change was scary to me. I was always happy where I was comfortable, like I would have probably said no, but at the time, Kill 'Em All, if you were joining a great band, but you were joining a band that were put out an independent album, were playing clubs. You didn't know they were going to be this,
Yeah.
If I had been asked and knew now in the future what they'd become, I would have traveled back in time and kicked my own ass to take that job.
The David Ellefson Show. Featuring Grammy Award winner David Ellefson and respected metal journalist Joshua Toomey. Presented by EllefsonEmporium.com. Here is David and Joshua.
Hey everybody, David Ellefson here. We are back, the David Ellefson Show, with my co-host Joshua Toomey. And today we have a super cool guest coming on, one of the OGs of thrash metal, Mr. Gary Holt from Exodus, also of Slayer. And one of my early friends from probably one of my very first friends, him and Bailoff and the Exodus crew, when we debuted Megadeth up there in 1984. So we got a lot to talk about with him. And of course, he has his new book, A Fabulous Disaster, which is coming out. So we'll chat with him about that. But before we get into that, Josh and I were waxing philosophical about all of us being young musicians at the time, who was better, who got what call for what gig, et cetera, et cetera. And I think we kind of watched Metallica learn how to play their instruments while growing up as Metallica. Now knowing the history where James, was largely a singer, and from what Robert Trujillo says, an incredible bass player. So apparently, really? Actually a really guy. Yeah, I was. I don't know if that was in the master class, but he was talking about what a great bass player James is. So I think James kind of had his hand on all of it, which is what makes him a fantastic songwriter. But it's funny as maybe Lars cast the vision. He and James, teamed up as a duo, and then I kind of think it's largely we watched James grow up as a musician, becoming more and more of a guitar player, especially the clean parts. They get into Welcome Home Sanitarium, into the clean parts of Enter Sandman, into Sad But True. All these things. Those clean parts are not easy to play.
Right.
It requires such discipline and such. You got to be really clean on your execution. That's not something that you can just hack your way into. Like for instance, on So Far So Good So What, Jeff Young told me he's the one who played all that acoustic. He played a lot of those clean parts. He was very skilled, very, practiced musician, which you have to be. You can't just sort of come in and nail that to the wall. You have to be pretty spot on. So I guess for all of us, Exodus, probably Testament, Overkill, all of us, we, I think the public kind of watched us learn how to get better at our craft. So here's the question. You brought up the question, let's use Rust in Peace as sort of the benchmark, I guess, since it's benchmarked. It's not my opinion, but I think probably.
No, I think it's, one of the greatest thrash albums of all time. So yeah. And it's technically proficient. And what I was saying to you before we started recording was, I think Lars's drumming kind of, obviously holds the band back a little bit, and that's not disputed by a lot of people. So I think that kind of helped them when it came to the mainstream. They didn't write these crazy technical records. Obviously, Justice for All is probably their closest, but if you go back and talk to Steve Thompson and Toby Wright and all those guys, they talk about how they had, how many cuts they had to do and edits to the drum tracks to get those sounding as tight and as good as they are. So I think that like their musical proficiencies kind of held them back a little bit, which probably helped them with the mainstream audience. They didn't get too technical and write some crazy tech death record. They wrote the Black Album and sold a bazillion copies. Yeah.
So to that end, Gar Samuelson could probably play circles around anybody in thrash metal, and he would, as anytime somebody brought up another drummer, he would just laugh. He'd go, I can play circles around that guy. As he's smoking a cigarette, drinking a beer, sit down and just lay waste to anything and anyone, because his background was not in rock and roll so much as it was in more, prog, not even prog, jazz rock jazz, that fusion kind of sound, right? So, it's interesting. The thing I always admired about Lars, I love his drumming. I think it's great. I think it's creative. And I think that for, watching even the masterclass talking about the composition of the riff of Enter Sandman, right? There's the A, da, 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 A, da, 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 A, da, da, da. Then the B section, ga, 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 da, da, A, da, 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 right? So the A section happens 3 times, the B section, and that's real smart industry songwriting. You know what I mean? Like, that wasn't just happen shit. Hello, bro, it sounds cool, da, da, da. Like, those guys, were well schooled and educated by producers and A&R men, as much as they always kind of had this, oh, we do whatever we want, we don't listen to anybody, da, da, da. Well, obviously they were listening to people, and you could tell, right? And me being in the business, maybe a mile behind them in Megadeth, and them up front knocking down all the doors for all of us. Clearly they were taking cues from those in the know, and just hearing in the masterclass this educated approach to songwriting, because that's real stuff. When you sit down and, like, if you were in Nashville writing tunes, Abacab, right? I guess it was Genesis, right? Abacab, that's what that is. It's the ABA, ABBA, ABA, CAB. Those are the sections of the riff of the song. That is the song. They basically handed us, this is how we wrote the song. There's the A section, the B section, the A section, the C, the A, the B, right? That's the composition of the tune. So it's funny how, I think, were in a way smarter than all of us, because they were really, Lars had this vision up ahead. He could see 5 years down the road, whereas maybe others, we're just even following what they were doing. I know in Megadeth, we were not following what they were doing. We were definitely beating to our own drum, and making it up as we went along. So it's interesting. I look at like AC/DC, right? Everybody is a cool player, but they're certainly greater than the sum of its parts, right? And I know growing up as a bass player, some people would discount maybe Cliff Williams. Oh, those bass lines are so easy. Well, I'll tell you what, AC/DC songs are some of the hardest songs to learn, not from their part. Well, first of all, the voicings of the chords have to be played right, but also the arrangements. I remember my band Taz, right? When we put that high school band together to play at the county fair a couple years ago, right? Yeah. Sin City was like the hardest song to play, because it's like, how many times does that go around in the beginning? How many times is that in the midsection? Oh, wait, it's 5 times. Well, it's one of the guitar, forward the band, so there's all these little arrangement things that are so simple yet so clever. And if everybody doesn't get it right, it's a train wreck, So, and then also listening to like these bass lines, like Back in Black and things like that. Clearly Mutt Lange, the producer, he knew where every single note was, and every single note was there for a reason and a purpose. And it wasn't just like, oh yeah, wow, we should have caught that. We guess we didn't catch, that didn't happen in making those records, right? Like, everything was intentional and was in its place. So it's funny how when we listen to these recordings, and I came to appreciate that making records, probably like you did too, is that you realize, okay, this is going to last forever, and it'll probably outlast us, our recording.
I think it's funny you say that. I think I thought that the most when I was younger, and like that put so much pressure on me. Like, I knew going into it, even at like 16, 17 years old, I'm like, oh my God, what we put down to tape today, could last forever, could be our kill 'em all, could be, the thing that kind of starts everything. So like, when it comes to that red light fever, you get like, when that red light goes on, you tense up, you freeze up, all that other stuff. I definitely thought that back in the day, kind of back to Enter Sandman and stuff like that too. What kind of grew Metallica to me at that time was I'm getting into metal, but that riff is so simple that as a young bass player, you could play that. You could get in a room with a bunch of friends and play Enter Sandman and actually make it sound pretty good because it's pretty simple riff, but it's rocking, it's heavy, it's driving, all that good stuff. And even in the Gary Holt's book, he talks about how, everybody talked about how much they hated the Black Album, but he's like, when I first heard Enter Sandman, I was like, fuck yeah. Like that's an awesome riff. And, and it's not so hard that, upstart musicians can't get in a room and kind of jam it out.
Yeah, and I think that was sort of it's funny, thrash, while it wasn't considered prog metal, and it didn't really have odd time signatures per se, was kind of prog in its nature.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It was very progressive. We were all trying to push each other, push ourselves to be better and better. We didn't just want to do what hair metal was doing and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, so then this should be a great conversation with Gary today, and get into that. So
one thing about the book too is you always say it. He's like, we're all in the same band. And listening to Gary Holt talk about Exodus, I'm just like, God, we are all in the same band.
Yeah, we are. Yeah. Yeah. No, it really is true. So whether your band, is a hobby band, a weekend warrior band, a part-time moneymaker band, a tribute band, because I think it comes back to the simple thing of our instruments choose us. I was talking to Don Menza about that the other day.
Mm-hmm.
I went over to the Menza's house after the movie premiere in LA, and just to get caught up and get their feelings on it. And they loved it. Don was talking about how he was still processing the emotions. It's interesting. Nick was born while the Menzas were living in Munich, Germany, because Don was working over there as a saxophone player, I think with Louis Belson's band. And Don was in Munich the day Nick died. And
oh, wow.
Talk about a full circle, right? And, people are saying like, oh, I don't know how you get rest. You just keep going, you keep going, you keep going. And Don, sitting on the couch, he looks over, he goes, man, that's how you do it. The phone rings, you go. When you're in the groove, you don't think about it. Like, and I'm thinking, he's 89. Yeah. He just stopped touring 3 years ago. And wow. I told him, I said, you know what, Don, I'm doing the same circuit you're doing now. When I go over there with Bass Warrior, that's kind of the same circuit that he does. I play like kind of blues and rock clubs. He played the jazz and blues clubs, right? I said, we're probably playing in maybe some of the same venues, so it was very
Hi, guys.
Hey, brother, how are you?
Good. How are you guys doing?
Top of the morning, man. How are you?
Fucking tired.
I was thinking how times have changed, and we're all up it's 10 a.m., by the way, for us.
No, I've been up for much earlier writing lyrics, because I write lyrics in the fucking early hours when the world is quietest, like.
Yeah.
And we finished our last day in the studios in 4 days, and we've been in the studio since March 1st, and
jeez,
we're just grinding because we're recording 2 albums at once.
So what is that about? Fill us in on that.
We had so much fucking killer material, and I mean killer shit, not filler.
Yeah.
That we like, let's fucking just work super hard, finish it, and then we'll tour the fuck out of the new one, and then we'll like just go on vacation and do the artwork and drop another one. Because I'm 60 years old. Say we tour for the new album, for a solid 3 years. I'm now 63. Well, I'll be 61, so I'll be 64. And, who knows if I got another album after that? This shit's getting harder to play all the time.
Well, then at 65 is mandatory retirement, so then you might be retired halfway through.
I know. Who knows?
There's no
do it myself.
We belong to unions, of course, but musician unions like after whatever. But there is no retirement. There is no
for the union label.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, that's what you were just talking about with Don Menza.
Lee's written a bunch of stuff, and we're not going to finish by the time we're done. We'll be, but we're trying to make sure all the basics are done. Because
so we were
in the back of a bus.
When we were scheduling this, you were doing some shows. Were those Slayer shows or what? Or were those Exodus shows that you were doing?
No, that was just a one-off. We headlined one of the nights of the Decibel Metal and Beer Fest, and we did like Bonded by Blood in its entirety. kind of a warm up. Rob's first show back.
Yeah.
Because we have coming up on the 25th and 26th, we're doing the Bonded by Blood anniversary shows, and in Berkeley and Anaheim, and those sold out in like record times for us. So it's nothing flat. So we're like super busy. And then we go do a short tour immediately after. They're not Bonded by Blood shows, but I'm like, maybe I should have like not done so much.
Hey, dude, you know what? With Kings of Thrash, we did the same thing. We were super ambitious. We came out and management said, look, do 2 albums. And so we did Killing Is My Business, which is our Bonded by Blood, right?
Yeah.
About, 28 minutes long, not super long, and, remember those records. I don't know. How many songs did Bonded by Blood have? Because our first couple
9, and it's like 45 minutes long.
Wow. Okay. Yours was long because those first 3 records for us in the 80s, and it was probably because of music publishing considerations. I think they only had 8 songs on them. They weren't that long. So you had Killing and So Far So Good So What, but super muscular frickin'. I mean, you're like, geez, man, what are we thinking? So I get it. It's heavy duty, right? So
yeah.
And because you were there, like I was, playing on those records, so in a way, it kind of comes back. How easy did it come back for you to relearn all that stuff? Was it kind of
we played most of the stuff all the time anyway, random in rotation. Right. So it was, super easy. That stuff's in my DNA, I don't have to really practice that. It's the newer stuff that's actually much more difficult to play, that requires like a little more effort. But, that stuff, I've been playing it since I was a kid,
Yeah. Right before you came on, we were talking, I was kind of recapping the Nick Menza movie premiere, and I went over there to the Menza's house, and, Don is a badass, played with all the Henry Mancini, Buddy Rich, Louis Belson. He's 89. He just got off the road 3 years ago at 86. And,
there's hope for us, Dave.
Yeah, right. Like I told him, I said, dude, if you're not on stage at 80, you're a total sissy. You know what I mean? It's like, what the hell?
No, there's 2 ways of looking at that. That there's hope for us that we can play into our 80s, or the hope for us that someday it ends.
Yeah. This is it.
It might take till 80, but at some point I'll be able to like.
Well, Gary, diving into the book, though, I mean, sometimes it has ended in Exodus and you end up roofing or cleaning up mouse shit out of a RV, so sometimes you don't want it to end. So you want it to end in a good time.
Yeah, exactly. I didn't die of the hand tube virus, which,
right.
That's how bad it was. I was like, that was a thing. And I was like, man, this can't be good. There's like just the largest amount of rodent droppings and urine in this thing. And I got to clean it. And my boss is yelling at me, and I'm thinking I might die from it. I had a mask on, but, I'm still here. Now they think, Gene Hackman's wife died from it, so I'm consider myself lucky. Maybe all the chemicals that were still coursing through my veins, I fought it off.
Dave always says, we'll say, Dave, when Dave, we always talk about, watching Year and a Half of Life of Metallica and all this other stuff. Like Dave's like, we're all in the same band. And as I listened to this, I listened to the audiobook, and I'm like, God, we are all in the same band. Like, you ever just hearing all the stories of Exodus and touring and drugs and no money, and just, it's insane how everybody's just kind of been the same band.
Yeah, the stories belong to all of us. I mean, Dave was there for a lot of it, and like, and it's kind of like for instance, a Murder in the Front Row movie. Brian, Lou, and I consider it like our high school yearbook. But it belongs to everybody who was there, not one person. They just happened to chronicle it all before the advent of a phone in everybody's pocket. A camera, I mean, sorry.
It's funny you mentioned that, because I remember Metal Allegiance, we did a show right across the street at the Fillmore in San Francisco.
Mm-hmm.
And then the premiere of Murder in the Front Row was at the theater, which used to be the Kabuki Theater that you and I played at. You probably played it a lot, but I know Megadeth only played there once. It was Megadeth.
Bonded by Blood release party.
Is that what it was? Oh, man. Yeah. I remember it was freaking killer, dude. It was so rad. That theater was so cool. And I went there and it
was super cool.
Like a Kabuki Theater. Now it's like an AMC or whatever movie theater,
Yeah,
but,
yeah.
I remember sitting there while the Murder in the Front Row is playing. Josh, you should have seen this. This was like Mystery Science Theater 2000. Like the Exodus guys were like They were like heckling, but they were heckling themselves because they were like kind of pretty much the stars of the movie, you know?
Oh yeah.
And it was so funny hearing them laugh and yell. And it was like being in a movie with a bunch of teenagers, you know? So you're right. It was kind of like
not quite as bad as the Minecraft crowds, but
yeah, but similar. Hey, so one of the reasons I wanted to have you on your new book,
yes, sir.
A Fabulous Disaster, From Garage to Madison Square Garden the Hard Way by Gary Holt, and forward by Kirk Hammet. The book is now out, and so a couple things I just wanted to start with. You were kind enough to ask me to write a little, a little blurb for it. So thank you for that. And I want to read too. I want to read me and Dave Mustaine's because they're almost exactly the same. So if you've obliged me from, let me read it. And it speaks to your character, and it speaks to you being the host with the most. So mine says, Gary is one of the most fiery and wickedly recognizable guitarists of thrash metal. And he's one of the first musicians to welcome me into the Bay Area when we debuted Megadeth there in 1984. He's a thrash metal OG. He's lived it. He helped build it. And his name is firmly on the door of our genre. This book is not for the faint of heart, as it tells it like it was, warts and all, of a young man who learned the ropes of our business from the ground up and became a true superstar. Now, Dave's, quote, a gritty, no-holds-barred look into one of the true, original American metal pioneers. Gary Holt is one of the first people I met in San Francisco and one of my oldest and dearest friends. He's always stood out as one of the best of the guitarists in all 5 bands. To be honest, I was surprised he could spell. Love you, Gary. It's funny. But out of 5 bands, meaning the big 4, Metallica, Megadeth, Slayer, Anthrax, and Exodus, of course, right? And then I want to fast forward over here real quick to our friend Kirk Hammet, who was, you were in Exodus with him, and we'll get into that here in a minute. So it says, Kirk says, he goes, in the foreword that he wrote, he goes, I was impressed. He, meaning you, Gary, had good taste in music. He was into the Nuge, Ted Nugent, that would be, Sabbath, Deep Purple, Rainbow, all the great 70s hard rock that was common ground for us. So there was a lot I could play for him. Over the next few weeks, I played him new albums by UFO and Iron Maiden, and we really got into the new wave of British heavy metal scene happening in the UK. Gary loved all of it. He took it all in, and that was part of what brought us together. So, you welcomed Metallica into the Bay Area. That would have been what, 1981 or 82 when they moved up?
Like that. Cloud, one of those, maybe 80, maybe 82, I think. Maybe,
yeah. That was when Metallica relocated to the Bay Area to get Cliff Burton in the band, basically.
Well, no, the first time we ever met them, we played they came up from LA and we played a show at the Old Waldorf with them, and I'd never heard of them before.
Okay.
And,
I didn't either. When I moved to LA, I hadn't heard of them either. Now this was 83, so they were obviously buzzing by this point, but it had not made national news yet, right? So they were a West Coast buzz band. So then they move up there. You were the host, you and Bailoff, singer of Exodus at the time. In fact, I remember Bailoff and your manager Adam coming down and basically staying with me and Dave down at the apartment on Sycamore, and Bailoff sitting over in the corner,
a good time,
like a little Buddha with his bong. Well, we were listening to Hawaii. That was the first time I heard Marty Friedman. He goes,
"Yeah, I remember that record. We loved it." Me and Bailoff. That was
totally. So we're sitting around listening to all kinds of killer shit. Hawaii being one of them. The Pit and the Pendulum. And, him just sitting there like a little Buddha with a bong between his legs. What was his word? This is gnarly. This is nasty. He had a word. What was his word?
He had
friendly.
some.
This is friendly, man. This is friendly.
Oh yeah, it's so friendly.
Yeah, that was his thing. So Exodus, you're a founding member, correct?
No,
you're not the founding member.
No, I'm not. I joined the band already in existence.
You joined Exodus, and I'm just acting like an idiot here. I'm playing dumb, so you can tell us the story, because that's what I loved about reading the book. As much as I know you, and I know a lot of the stuff, one of the funniest parts is when you guys were on tour with Venom, driving around in the car. But Kirk Hammet, who of course went on to be in Metallica, had Exodus, right? You then joined Exodus. Then he gets the call to. I just want to talk about it real quickly, not to be controversial, but you became friends with Dave, who was in Metallica. Now Dave's out of Metallica. You're kind of best friend here, Kirk, from your band Exodus, gets the call to go be in Metallica. What was that transition like? Because essentially you kind of moved into first position as the lead guitar player at that point.
Yeah, it just, it's a whole incestuous relationship for sure. Kirk's an Exodus, Kirk joins Metallica. I'm friends with both, and like there was a lot of sniping and stuff and a lot of bad blood, but I stayed out of that. But yeah, it kind of put me in the driver's seat. I was starting to write a lot of riffs. Like when I joined, Kirk wrote everything. And at the time when he left, I was happy for him. It was like, people used to say, "Oh, why didn't they call you?" And like, I would have probably said no, because I've never been one to embrace change. That would have been better.
Buddy, that's a question me and Josh were actually talking about, right? Before you came on, we were just sound checking, and I was thinking about that. What if you had gotten the call? Would you have gone? And
probably not, because at that time in my life, change was scary to me. I was always happy where I was comfortable, like I would have probably said no, but at the time, Kill 'Em All, if you were joining a great band, but you're joining a band that were put out an independent album, were playing clubs. You didn't know they were going to be this,
Yeah.
If I had been asked and knew now in the future what they'd become, I would have traveled back in time and kicked my own ass to like take that job.
Was there any thought of asking Dave to join Exodus?
No. I just, it's like, congratulations, Kirk. I love you, bro. And thanks for getting me started on this journey and teaching me my first licks and chords. And now it's my band. Let's go. Yeah, let's fucking
And
go.
It really was, I want to, flash back to New Year's Eve, 1984 was it 85? No, it was 85 into 86. It was supposed to be Anthrax, Metal Church, Exodus, and Metallica. And for some reason, Anthrax pulled off the bill, and so they called us. So it was Megadeth playing first. It's the Santa Monica Civic Center. And Metallica had just gotten back from recording.
No, it was Bill Graham Civic.
Was it okay?
Yeah.
Is that what it was? Yeah. So, it's the Civic Center, whatever it is, right downtown, right? It was a big venue. It was an arena, right? So Metallica just got back home from recording what was to be Master of Puppets. Remember, they still had the Ride the Lightning backdrop. And, Metal Church, of course, great. We all loved Metal Church. They were not really in the thrash genre, but, had their kind of their own genre, and I remember clearly Exodus, you guys just fucking laid waste to all of us. I mean, you guys were amazing. It was probably one of the best shows. I mean, that and that Kabuki show that I talked about. But that show that night, man, you guys were on fire and you were just fucking killing it, man. Your energy and your playing, the excitement. I mean, just everything about it. And of course, Metallica comes out and they're hometown heroes, but if you really put it pound for pound next to each other, you guys just fucking slaughtered all of us, dude. It was fucking so good.
Yeah, I mean, I say in the book, like here's an example. Brian Liu had posted on his Instagram. Brian Liu, one of our oldest friends, and certainly an inner circle member of the Metallica family and Exodus.
Right. Since
the very first days of both of us, posted like kind of an anniversary post for that show, and he said Exodus just smoked Metallica. And, people think of Metallica as the superhuman group, and I'd said recently, Metallica could blow us off the stage now if James got up and did armpit farts, the crowd would give him a bigger response because they're fucking Metallica and they've earned it.
Yeah, of course.
At that time, they were conquering the world, but we were conquering the fucking Bay Area. They'd become the epicenter of the Slay team and all that. And Brian said Exodus smoked him, and someone commented on the comments, "Oh, it's impossible." Blew Metallica off, and he goes, "If they were there, yeah." And James, after the show, we were partying our asses off, and he goes, "That's the last time you guys opened for us." It was the last time we opened for Metallica.
It was. He held true to his promise.
We didn't play with him again for decades, and that was a festival, But Bailoff at his peak powers, and we came out and I borrowed every Marshall cab from every friend I had. We had a taller drum riser and more stacks, and you couldn't see their backline. It looked like they weren't even on the stage, And we fucking came on and, we also had the prime spot in the bill, by the time Metallica comes on, there's also, the exhaustion factor with the crowd. They're fucking worn out now.
I would always tell Dave that because, as you know, in fact, I remember specifically the gig you came in to play in Slayer. I was sitting at catering with Kerry King, and you could just, you could tell the transition was going to happen. That Jeff Hanneman was going to be stepping aside, and we didn't know obviously for how long or anything like that. But I said, "Who's coming in?" He goes, "Gary Holt," like that, like just immediate confidence. Fuck Gary Holt. And it was so, I was like, no shit. All right. That's a good fit. And then I remember coming downstairs from the dressing room. What was your first show? Do you remember the venue?
Australia, the Soundwaves Festival, the little traveling.
Okay. So I guess you had already played with them, and maybe he was bringing you in, I thought it was in Europe or something, or maybe.
No, Australia. Yeah. Because it was, putting in all that work to do the first show, and we played, and it was killer. And then the second show we didn't play because Tom got sick. So it's like, oh, listen, I canceled my first Slayer show.
But there was another spot. Megadeth Slayer were on tour, and I don't think it was after that. At some point, I guess the show doesn't really matter. But I just remember coming down and going, "You're playing a solo." I go, "Fuck, Slayer sounds great tonight." I went, "Oh, wait a minute. That's right. That's Gary tonight. That's Gary's cover show of the tour." And I swear to God, it was like solos are in tune. Everything's fucking like sounding really like musical Slayer. You know what I mean? And it was great. And obviously,
they never asked me to play like anybody but myself, which is awesome. They, because I can't play Jeff's solos. He's got a style unique to himself. In a world of like textbook technical shredders, his shit's the hardest to do. Right. I would embrace the challenge of playing Marty Friedman's parts more readily. It's like Marty's one of the best guitar players in the world. Yeah. But it's musical around the way that I was brought up to play. I just had to learn the scales and the mode and the chops and all that. Jeff sits so far outside the box, it's really hard, but they never asked me to. I just tried to match vibe. If Jeff was like real frantic, I'd play real frantic. If he, the Show No Mercy stuff, there's a lot of melody in his playing. So I kept those key little signature melodies as often as I could.
So, it's interesting. We had a manager, Jay Jones, who you may have met. He kind of helped negotiate the combat deal for us for King Is My Business. And then he was out of the picture after that. But, Garcia Emerson worked at BC Rich Guitars. And so they were able to get those Kaler bridges, right? And I remember when Jay got one for Kerry, and he put it on the red Mocking, and suddenly changed, from what I can tell, changed the whole arc of Slayer guitar solos. Because now suddenly all like woo, 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 right? They had all the wind bars in it.
It's a unique vibrato bar. It's not for me. They're beautifully made. I remember Mustaine had them in his guitars and doesn't use a whammy bar because it was a great bridge. Because you could lock it in place, where it doesn't move at all. And you had these wonderful fine tuners and these roller tail pieces, and it worked amazing. But I'm a Floyd Rose guy. Always have.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing with the Kaler. You didn't have to rip the whole guitar apart. You could just route it, put it in. It didn't have this
slack. Yeah.
It's funny. I put one on a bass one night. I was all jacked up and, partying, and said, fuck it. Let me get out the chisel. So I chiseled out a BC.
We do shit like that when we're partying, don't we?
Exactly. And I put it on there, and all of a sudden I go, boom, boom. As soon as you hit the I thought it'd be like, this would be some route, I get some distortion, I could fucking be Jimi Hendrix on the bass or something. But it's like and it just would fart out. And I went, yeah, I never thought about that. The fucking bass string is pretty floppy, and it's in Kaler.
You're talking to a guy who scalloped the fretboard of a Flying V in his hotel room in England, high on meth once. So,
it's funny. I always say,
we like to party and work on shit.
Down in LA, we our white lines were cocaine. Up in the Bay Area, they were crank. You know what I mean? And we've obviously had our journeys, which were generally pretty fun. Megadeth, obviously we got into some darker stuff, but it was, for the most part, our genre was beer, pot, a little snort of something white or whatever, but I remember, talking to you guys, we went through our, sober changes. Right. And I remember when Exodus, you guys are all excited. Yeah, we're sober, man. And you guys all had beer, and you're like, sober. And he's like, yeah, man, we're not doing roll off meth and it's great. And I was thinking,
new version of California sober.
California sober.
That's what they call it when you will smoke weed.
Yeah, in the book, I think you say, we're drinking beer. We were sober, but we were drinking beer, smoking pot, maybe do a little cocaine, but we weren't doing meth, so we were sober.
Yeah, technically, like coke, The funny thing, we always had our little Exodus terminologies. We called in the early days cocaine, we called it dog.
I remember that. Yeah,
you got to bag a dog.
Yeah.
And crank we called raw dog because it was raw and it hurt, And eventually we did so much crank that we just dropped the raw and now dog was crank, It's like a code word. You call someone up, you got some dog?
I think by the time I met you guys, it was dog. I remember, at the hotel or the motel, somebody laid some out for me and I snorted it, and I was used, and I was like, it's one of those, like it was back in the day, you snort it, pop it, drink it, whatever, and then you ask what it is, right? So it's like, that's like, oh fuck, what was that? This dog, dude, and I was like, what's dog? And crank, bathroom crank, so whatever it was, and it was like biker.
Snort first, ask questions later.
Exactly. It's like, fuck, it nose hurts like hell. But I stayed up for like.
We sound like we're glamorizing it, don't we? It sure sounds fun, man.
Well, back then, it all seemed like a good idea until one day it isn't, So yeah.
Well, we used to get a half gram, and the whole band would snort that through the evening, and we would be able to drink all night. We'd party and eventually go to sleep. And then, towards the dark days for me, it became the half gram goes in the pipe at once, like smoke it, hit it, let it crack back and dry, put the pipe away, pull it out, smoke some more. And, then the consumption gets real deep and now you're up for 4 days,
Well, that's where it ends, right? And maybe not for everybody, but for a lot of us, me too,
yeah.
And look, that's by 89 into 90, we had to get clean. Our band was dead in the water. We had to get clean. As I always say, that which doesn't kill you only gets you clean, so.
Yeah. I mean, it took me a long time, but God, it sure has been a long time now. The last time I did drugs was December 2002 in Athens, Greece, when we ran out of the dope we smuggled, like in the first 2 days of the tour,
You can tell when someone quit because they remember the day. You know what I mean? They remember the month.
I can look up the actual day. I just have to look at the show day, But yeah, it was December.
Yeah, there's a time on the calendar, and that's when it became real, and that's because it matters, right? And
Paul died in February of that year, and it still took me that long to get clean. It actually got worse, before I got better.
Yeah. Which often happens. Well, the good news is we're out of that. We've lived to carry on, and it was always great. You and I reconnect almost annually for Metal Allegiance.
Yeah, absolutely. It's always a good time.
Yeah, Metal Allegiance is kind of our metal summit. It's our sort of the gathering of our tribe. And most of it.
It's a chance to get together with the old friends that because of our own schedules we might not see all year.
Yeah.
What's up? High five, fucking what are we playing today?
Yeah.
It's good times,
It's really great. And again, people healthy. It's like those Sepultura guys are like, man, we all quit drinking. And it's funny. It always happens. It's somebody, you just get to a certain age, a certain point in your life, and other things become the priority. And, let's face it, traveling the world is not always easy, as we know. And just to add the extra frickin' burden, of that lifestyle, it's nice when it goes away, So it's like,
today is actually my 1,400 days sober. So I have the little app that tells me, and I do the little daily affirmation every fucking day. 1,400 times I've gone in there and like put in my activities and all that, and I don't need to do it anymore, but I'm stubborn. Like I've done it 1,400 times. I'm going to do it 14,000. I quit now, delete the app. But, and it tells me, all the milestones. And today it said you're 1,400 days since your last drink. So Wow.
No shit. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Good for you.
Yeah.
Well, Gary, I wanted to.
Well, I'm well preserved from all the old chemicals. Like, get a little gray in the beard. My hair doesn't have a single gray hair in it. My wife says I'm a freak of fucking nature. I mean, the hair in my chest is getting white. Back hair is turning white, but not this. It's still natural color. This is
Look at Keith Richards. He'll never die.
I have to be a little just for men on this. Sometimes I'm right, obviously.
We don't have hair growing out of our ears and out of, that's the thing, right? The hair stuff.
No hair in my ears.
Your nose, right?
My wife.
Well, Gary, I wanted to ask about
gray hair in my head, and she grabs it, and pulls it, and saves it. Good. Like, oh, I spotted one, you motherfucker, and she takes it.
Yoink. Wanted to ask about Gary. When Megadeth comes to San Francisco for the first time, and you meet a young farm kid from Minnesota named David Ellefson, what were kind of your first impressions of him and his playing, and just kind of impressions of Megadeth right out the gate?
Well, we being friends with Dave Mustaine already, we were like eagerly awaiting his return, and Junior, as we all called him, was just, immediately welcomed right into the fold, and Gar in Poland. And well, the first show was with Kerry fucking King,
Right.
And we were thrilled. We were there to fucking rage and kill posers and support, like been friends ever since,
Yeah, it was, it's funny because Kerry, I think Dave was hoping Kerry would join Megadeth, of course, and it would have made it easy because he fucking could play everything that Dave threw at him. He's such a great, he's got the soul for this, right? The heart and the soul for it. But, I remember when we were at, in fact, reading your book, I learned about when Slayer had already gone there ahead of Megadeth, I guess, right? They had gone up there before. So Kerry kind of, knew you guys, knew the culture. But I remember going to the record vaults to do an in-store as Megadeth on that first trip up there. We played Ruthie's, and then we played the Stone on Broadway there, and then we played in Palo Alto, Keystone. And I remember going to that record store, and fans were coming up asking Kerry about Slayer. And you could see the look on his eyes, because the guy felt like he was maybe a little torn, like, this Megadeth thing could work, right? Because it had a feeling around it. When I met Dave, I had a feeling like, this could do something. It's not going to be easy, and it's going to take a minute, but I think this is going to pop, And I could tell Kerry was probably a little on the fence with it too, going, yeah, this has got some fun. It's exciting, right? It was exciting being around those early days, right? Especially right after Metallica. You're in the Bay Area. Dave was a hero there. So he played that right. I remember he, saying like, yeah, we're not going to debut the band in Hollywood. We're not going to play any of these clubs here. We're going to go up to the Bay Area. And then, but then fans asking Kerry about Slayer, and I could see clearly like going, yeah, maybe I shouldn't be so quick to just join Megadeth. Maybe I should, keep my hand in Slayer, and then he went back home, and, that kind of retooled Slayer. They'd wiped the makeup off. They kind of had this partial Lizzie Borden kind of vibe. They were figuring it out, and then
they wiped the makeup off to play with us.
Oh, did they?
Because they had 2 shows booked in the Bay Area, one at the Keystone Berkeley, and like 1 or 2 nights later at Ruthie's with us. And they had the makeup on for Berkeley, and then we infamously just wrecked their hotel room at the Cove Motel. And we told them, you can't wear that shit at Ruthie's. Ruthie's is this punk rock and hardcore, so you're ever going to see. And that was their first show there, and they took it off. They didn't need it, I think it's just a remnant of being a band trying to find a place in the world in LA.
Totally, 100%. And it's funny,
Metallica had to leave to like fucking find a home.
Yeah. Well, it happens. When you're a hero somewhere else, before you become a hero in your own hometown. So. Mm-hmm. And I remember Kerry, always loved Tom Hunting. Just always talk about Tom. Tom's the best fucking drummer out there. The guy's fucking awesome. So it's kind of,
I played with some amazing drummers, but for me, for my own band, I wouldn't trade Tom Hunting for 1,000 of them. It was like he's, for Slayer, you've got Paul and Dave, obviously, and but for Exodus, it's Tom. All the way for the win, because I've been playing with the guy since I was 17. When I write a riff, his drumming is already in the thought process,
Right. Yeah, no, that's really cool. Now, let me ask you, it's funny because Combat was your first label, right? I wore the shirt.
Well, Torrid actually, which, was responsible for the whole delay of Bonded by Blood, because we signed an upstart new label with no experience. And we were their first band, and the growing pains were like, our growing pains too. And eventually they sold the rights to it in our future, projects to Combat. So we ended up on Combat from the second album.
And then you ended up on Capitol, right? Toxic Waltz. I remember seeing that on MTV. That was a Capitol.
No, that was still Combat.
It was still Combat. Okay.
Capitol tried really hard to buy us out of our Combat contract. And Fabulous Disaster would have been on Capitol if they had agreed to sell it, but they wanted that. From what I was told, the asking price was $1 million fucking dollars.
Oh, Jesus.
And then by the time we actually are free agents, and we signed to Capitol, the president of the label is gone. The A&R rep is gone.
Yeah.
The head of A&R is gone. Everybody who signed us had left before we ever recorded a note, so now we're like this unknown entity, and then we made like a super abrasive, raw, really, really fucking brutal album that was nothing like Toxic Waltz Part 2, and
right.
And things, didn't work out well for us,
They didn't know what to do.
In hindsight's always, a blessing to have. Had we stayed with Combat, we would have been a big fish in a small pond and probably done extremely well,
Well, it's funny. Combat, obviously, they bought our Capitol Records bought out our contract, right? So I'm sure.
And I think you're the reason why they asked for so much.
Oh, for sure, 100%. Because
100%. And we were following you there. We're like, we saw what they did for Megadeth, and everything was great. And
we were lucky.
We only owed Combat the last album anyway, and then we signed, and then shortly after the ink dries on the paper, everybody left,
Yeah, and that would always happen. Unfortunately, Tim Carr, who signed us to the label, and his West Coast counterpart was Tom Wally, who then went on to start Interscope with Don
exactly,
and went on to be the president of Warner Brothers, and is now the president of Loma Vista, which does all the Ghost records, and now Mastodon, I guess. So I mean, Tom has really been on the pulse of some great shit, So fortunately, we were that team was there with us. Probably maybe even through So Far So Good So What, something like that. But you're right. You get in the major labels, man, and it's top-down house cleaning. When the president goes, new broom sweeps clean, everybody goes.
Yeah, they're like, who signed this band? I don't know. Did you? I thought you did. I don't know. What are they about? Who are they? Are they a reggae band? Exodus? I don't know. Show me a picture. All right, they're handsome.
There's all that.
Good-looking guys. Fucking. So we look like little anime characters as we were wrecking everything.
So have you ever, I think you even talked about this in the book. Have you ever thought about doing a solo record, or is Exodus your solo record? Is that, are you?
No, I've wanted to do a solo project for a long time where I could maybe do something a little more on the hard rock realm of things. Cause that's what I grew up on. It's still what I listen to today. I'd love to just do like a real 70s Nazareth style hard rock.
I mean,
people like you. Well, I was just about to say,
I got a jazz bass right back there. I'm ready to go.
But it just comes down to time.
Yeah. It's funny because at Metal Allegiance, I don't know, I can't remember if you were on it, but remember they played Wang Dang Sweet Poontang, the Nugent song.
I should have been on that one.
I know with Blitz singing, I was like, fuck, dude, that is so good. That was so cool. And I'm the same way, dude. When I go back and listen to music, I just by nature go back and listen to Kiss and Nugent and Aerosmith and Stars and Angel and all this shit that I grew up with, Rainbow, all that kind of stuff. So, we're probably of the same ilk, even though we are, forerunners and leaders and make a living in a genre thrash, which we created after that. But it's funny how we kind of always go back and default to what we grew up on. There's a comfort. It's like a comfort food in a way.
Yeah, totally. See, when you guys did Wang Dang Sweet Pretanga, it was only a few months later that it bought me a big single cut hollow body Gibson. It's not a Birdland. The good Birdlands are 13 grand and up. But it's very Ted Nugent guitar, and I would have brought it for sure.
Yeah, no, that was I love that. I thought that was super cool. Well, I was just kind of wondering about that if
one of these days, something I've long thought about doing. It's just finding the downtime to do it. But I finally have developed some home recording stuff. Like I always had the gear, and I still recorded riffs on my phone. It's just the modern equivalent of a boombox recording. And maybe that'll make it a little easier. I could sit and record ideas at home and send them to people such as yourself.
I do, yeah, absolutely. I do the same thing, man. This is basically my home studio. When I moved here to Scottsdale back in '93, I thought, this would be great. Land is cheap, building is cheap, and you'd have a studio, And then, of course, as we were doing in those days, you make records, you go on these big year and a half tours. By the time you come home, most of it's outdated. It's like, and SSLs and Neves. I mean, that shit was $500,000 on up for those, in those days. So it never made sense to do that myself. And I'm probably like you. I'll record things in the voice memo. I'll put things down.
That's what I use.
Camera around. We write riffs so I remember them, and then get home and take them in the studio or send them around to my guys around the world who I work with, and just, hey, can you turn this into something? Here's the idea, because it always starts obviously with the initial seed of the idea of it. So
I'll revisit my phone notes and find like gems. When it that are like 10 years old, but sometimes I'll find like one riff, and then I'll record 10 variations of 2-second part that make no sense to me now at all. But that was me trying to capture a different picking technique or something. And I'm like, I don't even know what that is. Delete.
So can we, I want to dive into the book a little bit more on on your parents' side of the thing, and actually, getting into the book, learning more about your dad and kind of the situation. He meets your mom, and your mom's like a single mom of 4 already. And at the time, I mean, that's got to be, at the time, I mean, that's even, it's still probably not the best situation now. But back then, it's probably even worse, to be a single mom of 4. But it seems like your dad kind of came in and kind of took on the role, and must have just fell head over heels for your mom to kind of walk into that and walk in open arms, I guess, to the whole thing.
Absolutely. I mean, I mentioned in the book, if times were what they're now, I'm sure my dad would have legally adopted, my siblings, but, I didn't question even why we had different last names until I was probably in my teenage years. It was just my brothers, never.
Yeah.
He was their father, their birth father had abandoned my mom, when they were all small. They've never heard from him since, so fuck that dude, My dad's always stepped up and raised them, and he was an amazing man, wise, the wisest man I've ever met, and it took me so many years to learn some of the lessons that he tried teaching me, from everything from like guitar players. He'd trying to tell me about Chet Atkins, fuck that dad, Ted Nugent, now I'm like, oh yeah, Chet Atkins, fucking Roy Clark, would tell me about all these great country musicians. I didn't want to hear it then, but just, and just life advice, he was.
Yeah, you spoke very highly of him in the book. It seemed like a real hero to you.
He was, without a doubt.
As well, yeah.
And even I love the story of your mom coming to the show. David's also given a story of his mom coming out to a show at Lemoore in Brooklyn, kind of going to see Megadeth in the early days, and your mom coming out to see some of the first Exodus shows. And obviously my parents came to my early shows in little punk rock clubs and stuff like that too. And it's always awesome to kind of look out and see the madness, but then also see your family in the audience.
Yeah. My mom loved going to the shows. My dad had been to a couple. My mom had went to several, and, I think I talk about it in the book when they came to see us at the old Waldorf, which is right next door to the Punchline Comedy Club. And my brother was with her, and they asked some kid, we're looking for the old Waldorf. And like, no, I think you want the punchline. You know, I'm like, no, we want the old Waldorf. And because he was going to the show, and all right, it's right over there. And they heard him saying as they walked away, like, I'd never bring my mom to this place. Like, so, you know, like, she's like, all right, this could be different. But they had a great time. And like, my mom's friend Joanne was watching the show, and she like goes, "Yeah, Gary." And when her hand comes out, it goes right in this guy's pitcher of beer. You know, guy's drinking a whole pitcher, and the guy's about like 6'6", and he just looks down and smiles. You know, as she's taking the beer off her hand. But it never detoured them. You know, they came all the time. You know,
that's awesome.
Hey, so writing a book, you know, obviously, look, it's a rock and roll tale. There's a lot of fun. It's rowdy. It's all that it is. But then you also hit these emotional centers, you know, that are really kind of take you back, you know, for a minute. Maybe it was when you were doing the interviews with Adam, or however you guys did it when you put the book together. What's one or two that was kind of hit you, maybe unexpectedly?
You know, just talking about Bailoff, you know, talking about Paul's death, you know, it was fucking hard. Yeah. You know, it's one of your closest friends. You reconnected somewhat musically, because we connected, you know, a lot to do with drugs, but you know, we did connect and played some killer shows, and you know, we became best friends again. And then you lose them, and you're also spun out of your mind at the same time. Mm-hmm. And you're basically put in control of his, you know, the status of what happens to his body and all that, you know, because his sister, who we'd never met, we finally met her after, and she gave us full control. She said, "You guys are his family. I haven't seen him in decades, heard from him in decades," you know? Yeah. And so I needed the help from some friends of mine, lifelong friends who were sober enough and non-judgmental enough to help us without, like, you know, saying these guys are fucked up. What would they do without me, you know? You know, yeah, I wanted the book to pull off Scabs. You know, I wanted it to be raw and funny, laugh, cried on the edge of your seat, all that shit. You know.
Yeah, and it did, and it's funny because that was exactly what I was thinking about when I was reading about Bailoff in this. You know, last time I saw Bailoff was at the Shoreline Amphitheater. Megadeth had gone through. I don't know. We were coming through. I don't know, maybe with Motley Crue. I don't know who it was, but. And he was, you know, just a shell of himself. And I felt really bad. And he was like, "Hey, Junior. And I was like, oh my God, Paul, fuck, dude, you okay?" And, you know, it was near the end, you know, and I just felt really bad for him, you know. And
yeah, when he had the final stroke, you know, they, you know, did the CAT scans, and the doctor's talking to us, and he's saying, and we're pointing out the x-rays right here and here, there's his previous strokes. And it kind of made sense a little, because his speech had become very slurred. Mm-hmm. And he spoke fast, as you know, and like so many times I just like, okay, Paul. And I didn't really know what he said. And now it made sense why his speech had become slurred, because he'd already had 2 strokes.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, probably at the time to him, it was just a really bad fucking headache, you know, like, oh God, my head hurts. But he was actually stroking out, you know.
Man, yeah.
And then you have the good one, you know.
You know, so going through the transitions of singers as you have, and look, we know what it is being career musicians, career band owners, right? We sometimes have to make, you know, uncomfortable and unfavorable decisions about membership changes and stuff. And, you know, so to that end, transition a little bit here, you know, Rob is back in the band. You know, Rob actually lives here by me in Phoenix, and I would see him. In fact, I think he'd moved here maybe right as he had transitioned out of Exodus once before. And
pretty much, yeah.
Got to know him a little bit at that time. And now that he's back, you know, there's probably, I don't know if it's like this for you, but for me, there's always these memories when you're, you know, at certain times, there's memories when you're playing with a new member. Maybe it's a new old member like Rob. And you kind of, do you get a little bit of a trip down memory lane when you're playing Bailoff songs, or maybe when you're playing other material and Rob's singing it? I mean, Rob's making it his own now, obviously, because he's
absolutely. You know, Rob always, for one, aside from his powers as a vocalist, always had the greatest power was making me fucking laugh. You know, like, and Exodus are the kings of like new old past members. You know, we had Bailoff, new old past member. Zetro eventually was new old past member. You know. And Rob, you know, so we have the market cornered on that. But right now the band's like super fucking happy, and we're recording like some monumental fucking shit right now. It's like people are gonna shit the pants. It's fucking really, really good.
That's good.
Aside from how heavy it is, it's the songs, the hooks, Yeah. I mean, the heaviest song we ever written is on this album. It's also the slowest thing we've ever written. It's fucking
nice.
Sabbath, like Lord of this World heavy. It's so fucking doomy. It's fucking good.
Hey, Josh brought this up too as we were just bullshitting a bit before you got on about Metallica, of course, kind of always at the centerpiece of all of this stuff of the Bay Area and all that kind of stuff. But, you and I probably had the same opinion when the Black Album came out and suddenly you're Enter Sandman, and we're a lot of, thrash purists sort of shoved off anytime our bands, and they did it with Megadeth too, anytime we sort of branched out, maybe went a bit more to the mainstream, experimented, slowed down, got a little more melodic. And you said in the book you were talking about how fucking cool you thought that riff was. And I do too. I remember specifically where I was on the 405 driving past the Getty Museum around that area when I heard it on KNEC. Because what hit me is we had just done the song Go to Hell, ironically for Tom Wally at Interscope for the Bill and Ted movie. And we had just put the prayer in it. Now you lay me down to sleep.
Yeah, I remember. Right? Yeah.
Yeah, we had just recorded that, and suddenly, today, brand new Metallica, Enter Sandman, it comes on, and I hear that prayer. I'm like, what the fuck? How could these two brains think exactly the same, between Megadeth and Metallica? But I thought, oh my God, it's game over. This is it. This is it. And so it's funny you say that with Exodus, going to an area that you probably explored a bit, but to say like we've written our heaviest, but it's also our slowest, kind of more, of a different nature. And, look, at this age, why wouldn't you, right? Why wouldn't you just explore every corner of the room now? Who gives a shit?
I mean, one thing about Exodus since, the sober comeback, Tempo of the Dam, is we write entirely and only for ourselves. We don't give a fuck about anybody else. Right. That means the audience. We love you, audience, but we don't write for you. We write for ourselves. And if you're lucky, other people like it too.
Yeah.
And, there's new albums. There's blazing fast shit, like ridiculous. And then there's like shit that is so fucking slow and ominous and just fucking satanic and evil as fuck, just, oh my God, that is scary. It's frightening how heavy it is.
I've been
at the same time, it's got sections in it that are just beautiful. Like, just like the harmony section is just like gorgeous and lush and just stunning, and then it just wallops you with this doom fucking shit. It's like really cool, because we're gonna do what we want to do musically. We don't care about being pigeonholed into anything. I go fast because I like going fast. I like it. Yeah. Sometimes Tom goes, man, how many BPMs is this? I'm like 210. I was gonna get a shirt. I was gonna get myself a shirt made that says I live at 200 ppms, because like when I go fast, that seems to be my comfort zone. And then I wrote another one that had stepping up low, 210.
Yeah, nice. I've been nursing this Geddy Lee book, and he said the same thing. Like we were just writing songs for ourselves, hoping some other nerdy people like us like.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's why like if I'm make some social media posts and I'm talking about how crushing it is, and then you'll see like it gets reposted on some stupid website, which I won't name any of them.
Yeah.
And the comments are like, another band saying this. Well, what do you expect us to say? It's good, not as good as that other album, but it's kind of in between that. No, I'm excited. I'm a fan. I'm still a music fan. I get excited when I hear other people's music that's killer too, and I write music. We write music to excite ourselves, and so if we're excited, it's genuine. We fucking mean that shit.
Well, I'll let Josh, he always goes for a deep dive closer question, but I'll wrap up and just, look forward to seeing you July 5th in Birmingham at the Black Sabbath.
Yeah, it's going to be fucking awesome, dude.
I'm interested to see what it's going to be. Obviously, you're playing with Slayer, but, I'm getting some songs sent over, so it's going to be interesting to see what that sort of combination of whoever's on these songs is going to be. should be pretty fucking rad, man. Should be awesome. So I'm super glad.
That's going to be awesome. I'm super excited for that. I mean, I'm honored to have
100%
part of it, like I was talking to Kirk, and we were both like, man, this is like a massive honor to be a part of this, a band that means everything to us, our careers, and we get to pay tribute to them. How beautiful is that?
It's like, and I think, Josh, you said it best, when Metallica's third on the bill, it's going to be big.
Right?
Sabbath, Ozzy, Metallica, Slayer,
it's pretty sick, right?
All the guys.
Everybody's going to be there. Jason Momoa's going to be there. It's going to be a fucking good time.
It's going to be great, man. It's going to be great. So Josh, I'll let you close it up, buddy.
Well, I guess I'll just hit it with the Slayer question there. I mean, how were you taken aback when you got the call saying, hey, we're going to do a couple of festival dates here or there or after the big final shows and things like that?
People say, oh, you didn't do all along. Well, I knew sooner than some, but it's not like I knew it was coming. I assumed it might not ever happen. I never was told it was going to happen. But I mean, you'd have to, I'm sure offers had been made since probably 6 months after the final show, hey, can you guys rethink that? I don't know. Those aren't my decisions to make, but I'm happy to do it, and if the band wants to continue with a couple here and there, that's awesome because it allows me to focus on Exodus and still get to bathe in fire. It's awesome.
I think the way to do it, I think you have to say.
The only pyro Exodus is going to have is if we got a couple of Weber barbecues out on stage and threw some wood in it and squirted some charcoal starter on it and lit on fire until someone comes and puts it out.
With Dave on Combat, he always talks about they call Combat and say, hey, we need some tour support, and they basically tell them, you guys need to get some fucking jobs. Did Combat ever hit you guys up and say, after this tour, you guys should probably get jobs?
Yeah, there's still times, at 60 years old, I'm like, what if I had to get a job? Mainly the tattoos have gotten in the way of being employable. That's what
I asked Tom Mariah when you guys came through on the farewell. I think it was 2019 or 2020 or something, right? I think it was 2020. You guys came through on the farewell, and I asked Tom, I said, listen, I know, kind of Megadeth Slayer money was similar. It was in the same ballpark. And I said, how can you retire? Like, you have enough money in the bank? And he goes, well, I'm going to have to get a job. I'm like, doing what? Like Tom Mariah was worked at Costco? Like, the fuck? Like, really?
I think about that shit. I still carry a certain amount of insecurity in myself. And, I'm not financially secure. I'm if I didn't make another penny starting today, I could live for a little bit before I start selling off all my fucking equipment and guitars. But I can't retire. I got to keep working. I got to keep going. I mean, having a few months off is nerve wracking to me. Got to get out on the road. Got to, because we're all traveling T-shirt salesmen.
Pretty much.
We travel from town to town with a pop-up store, and we play music as a way to get you to come to our grand opening.
Yeah,
I mean, it sounds stupid. No one should take offense, but we survive on the power of the T-shirt. That you're lucky if the guarantees cover your expenses and all you're making is money off the shirts. You're way ahead of the game if you're not going in the hole from the start of the tour. Especially with the cost of fuel and buses now, it's ridiculous.
Yeah, I mean, look. It's all Lenny Kravitz.
Our store opening. We're here for one
Lenny
day.
Kravitz over in Europe, and I'm literally counting the hundreds of thousands of dollars by how many video walls he has. You know what I mean? It's just kind of, you and I know whether it's Exodus or it's Metallica or whatever the level that it is. It's like you can kind of go, okay, well, that's probably a month on the road to pay for all that, plus the pre-production, plus the staff, plus the hotel. Plus, you do it for a while. It's like, I could pretty much be on stage and count the gross by the time we got to the first chorus of the first song, you know what I mean? And just kind of go, because and that doesn't mean to make it, you're thinking only about money rather than the music. No,
but I mean, to do it, you have to make money, or we have to get those jobs that prohibit us from going on tour, and that's why it's so hard. And the only reason I tell people this is so they understand, even for a band like Exodus, it's a challenge. And, if I broke it down to people like, oh, well, we go on tour and we average this much, they go, wow, that's a fuck ton of money. And like, well, you take away 30% for the government, and then you factor in that I go home and I'm not going anywhere for the next 2 months. Now divide that by 3, and that's my monthly income. Yeah. And then the next tour doesn't make money, or whatever. It's like, it's not as cut and dried as it seems. And even for a band like ourselves who've been around forever, now you imagine a band of young guys who are out, touring in a van, it's even harder. We're lucky. I can do this still.
As we say, robbing Peter to pay Paul. So, look, hopefully book royalties, book advances will help pay. Gary, thank you, dude, for coming on.
Thank you. Thanks for having me, guys.
Wanted to get way ahead of this, to get right on top of the book, man. It's thank you for letting me be a part of it, and it was super great to read. And man, we'll see you in a couple of months. We'll see you in July.
I'll see you there. Thanks, guys. Right on, man.
See you.
Thanks, Gary.
See you later.
Yep. See you, man. Bye. All right.
It's so funny, the little in talk there. When I interviewed Newstead a couple of years ago, I asked him, why did you always wear Metallica shirts on stage? And he goes, because A, I'm a fan of the band, and then B, he goes, if I wore that shirt sold out that night at the merch booth, and he would get, the tour manager would come in and say, the shirt you wore last night sold 30% more than any other shirt, kind of thing. So yeah, we're all just, like you said, man, just t-shirts, traveling t-shirt salesman.
When we started Gigantour 2012, which was big, it was pretty much all arenas, a couple of theaters, but mostly all arenas, because it had finally landed right. And I think it was Megadeth, Motorhead, Volbeat, and Lacuna Coil. And we played the downstairs room at Madison Square Garden. It used to be called the Felt Forum. I don't know what it's called now. It's about a 5,000 seat room down there. And I remember going on stage, and I just had this feeling, I want to go old school, because we were wearing kind of the dinner shirts, the button down, shirts and that stuff. And I thought, man, this is the old school, man. Anthrax, Overkill. This is, where we started, with the playing L'Amour and all this stuff in New York. So I said to Dave backstage, I said, hey, I'm going to go old school. So I grabbed a t-shirt from merch, and it was a Megadeth 13, his 13 album. And I put it on. I said, what do you think? He goes, yeah, that looks cool. So I was like, all right, cool. So I put it on, wore it, had some great pictures. I think Jackson Guitars used an image from it for some of our marketing. And the next day, he was so pissed that I wore that shirt. He goes, we don't wear our shirt. We don't do that. We wear these shirts. I said, dude, like that, what a better way I bet that shirt sold really well, because one of the band guys had it on. And I said, hey, look at Iron Maiden. Fucking 3 or 4 of the guys in the band all wear Iron Maiden shirts, right. And Iron Maiden merch is probably the biggest heavy metal merch in the world, because of it. So I remember we had this whole dispute, and you need to call management. It was this whole fucking chastising, and I was just like, dude, come on. And I remember I was just like, whatever. But I still do it. I mean, Kings of Thrash, whatever. Yeah. Jazz, one of us will always wear a shirt. Look, partly because we like the shirt. It's badass. It looks killer. And you're proud of it. It's like, hey, this is like wearing your name on the shirt, And but it's true. It's people when they see their hero on stage wearing a shirt, they often go by and go, fuck, Ellefson wore it that night, or Gary Holt wore that shirt tonight. So and it plays back to the OG, the old school metal mentality. I think more of that.
At the end of that tour, did you get on the expenses report? It's like, the mini bar, blah, 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 1 t-shirt,
probably
deducted from your pay.
Probably. and a scolding. It's funny. It's funny that Gary talked about Murder in the Front Row, because Brian Lou, who he was talking about. So Brian was, I guess he said, a friend of Metallica in the Bay Area. So when Dave moved down to LA after coming home from Metallica, so Brian basically had a post office box and basically ran the Megadeth fan club, which was essentially this post office box that then he would send us letters, fan letters and stuff. And that was the one fan letter that came in I don't know if it was I guess it was probably the end of 83. And he said, that was the fan letter that said, dude, Dave, I hope your new shit's faster than Metallica. And then that fan letter that night, we go to rehearsal and all the fucking tempos go up about 40 BPM. And we became a speed thrash band that night, because a lot of those songs were, what became Devil's Island was initially called Eye for an Eye. And it had a whole different riff to it. It's a right? And then so what we sped it up, right? So that one fan letter by way of Brian Lew changed the course of certainly Megadeth, and if not the genre. So thank you, Brian Lew, for handling our fan club.
Well, speaking of fan letters and comments, I did see a comment today asking you to get, said, hey, David, can you get both Dave Mustaine and Lars Ulrich on the same episode of the David Ellefson Show? I was like, that's going to be right on the docket.
I wouldn't do that to Lars.
We get good ratings though, but I just love hey, can you get those two? Yes, I'll be right on that.
There's always some shit talker, and it's so metal, isn't it, dude? Get this guy in there. It's so Wayne's World. It's like thrash metal Wayne's World.
Yeah,
get this guy in there, and we'll talk shit. I mean, look, that became the thing. Heavy metal websites, right? This turn on comments so that everybody can just throw arrows in each other, talk shit. So.
It's a wild place.
Part of the culture.
As we end, let's kind of end on a somber note. But obviously, with the passing of Les Binks, I know you have some connections there. Played with him not too long ago, things like that. So just give me some thoughts on Les.
Man, I was shocked. A friend of mine from Mexico sent me that post from Judas Priest that I think was yesterday when he sent it through. Now, my son Roman looked it up. Apparently, Les had passed back in March.
I think it's been like a whole month.
Yeah, and they hadn't made an announcement about it. I was shocked, obviously. I hit Ripper right away. He said he had just heard about it. I emailed KK. I haven't heard back from him yet, but and he may have known about it as well. I don't know. But maybe it's the family's wishes to not make an announcement about it. But Les, it's funny is we were putting that show together, which this was end October, first week of November 2019, right? We had just come off the mega cruise. And my solo band, we went over to Europe with my guitar player Andy Martingelli, and we were doing a David Ellefson solo tour, kind of a More Life with Death tour. And I had been recently reconnected to KK through a mutual friend here in Phoenix. They had been doing some real estate stuff together. So we'd been reconnected, had a few phone calls and emails and whatnot. So I hit KK. I said, hey,
no, I was going to pull a you move. Speaking of KK.
So I hit KK. I said, what's up with your venue Steel Milk? Because I'd like to get a UK date because I'm mostly down in Italy and Switzerland and stuff. And so he helped put the show together. He built the show. We went through the ticket prices. KK is super knowledgeable about all that. Was very hands-on. And I said, hey, maybe you want to come up and jam a song. He's like, all right, mate, I don't know. We'll see. And, he was a little, I just wanted to invite him up. I thought it'd be fun, right? As a fan, of course, and friend of his. And then he played at Bloodstock with Ross the Boss. And then he emailed, he goes, right, I've tasted blood, mate. I'm ready to go. So he got that feeling of being back on stage in front of a festival. And so it was super great. And so my friend Todd here in town, Todd Decker, he said, look, let's get on the phone. I'll fly Ripper over. I'll pay for that. And so me, Todd, Ripper, and KK got on the phone, and Ripper brings up, he goes, dude, why don't we call Les Binks? And I practically dropped the phone. I went, dude, Les Binks is still around? And he goes, yeah, he's got a band. He plays around London. I said, oh my God. I said, KK, can we just please play Unleashed in the East, and I'll just die and go to Headbanger Heaven, and I'll never bother you again for anything. I'll leave you alone for the rest of your life. So we had a good laugh. So we got it together. We contacted Les, got him in, and then it was, me and KK, Ripper, Les, and his other guitar player, Andy, who's now in KK's Priest. And Andy's kind of KK's right-hand man, kind of like how Andy Martingelli is to me, with all my stuff. So that was it. And then my Ellefson solo band, we opened the show. I ran upstairs, changed the t-shirt, grabbed a different bass, went right on stage. And I mean, we opened with Riding on the Wind, so Les, and that's when it hit me, was on that show. In Megadeth, we've got a lot of songs that were started with these iconic bass riffs, right?
Mm-hmm.
Peace Cells, Wake Up Dead, Poison Was the Cure, all these different stuff, right? In Judas Priest, not only is it the guitars and Rob singing, but dude, they have got the iconic drum riffs, right? Whether it's, Living After Midnight, which is simple, to Exciter, Painkiller, and then here we are opening the show with Riding on the Wind. And man, Les was so great, and me and him, we went right up the street from the steel mill there in Wolverhampton, and we had a curry, and he told me the whole story about how his last show that he ever played with Judas Priest was Unleashed in the East, and he was a sideman. He was not a band member per se, and he said how he and Simon Phillips got most of the gigs in London. Of course, Simon had played on Sin After Sin, I believe, right? And now Les started with Stained Glass, Hellbent for Leather, and then Unleashed in the East was essentially the Hellbent for Leather tour. And they walked into the, I think it was Kosi Nenken Hall in Tokyo, where I played a bunch of times, and he saw a remote truck and a bunch of microphones set up, and he calls management and says, "Hey, I see there must be a live recording. This is a different arrangement for me. I'm hired as a live drummer, but if we're making another record, this is another agreement." And management sort of, yesed him, okey-doked him. It's not Priest's current management right now, by the way. I should clarify. This was an old manager from years ago, a long time ago, parted ways with. And KK talks about that in his book as well. And they basically kind of okey-doked him. And, so he does the gig. And I don't think he got paid. And that was it. That's why then when they went to go shoot the cover, there's a drum set, but there's no drummer because I don't know if they've even had a drummer in the band at that time. They had to shoot the cover. And I have since done a podcast, by the way, with Claudio Bergman, who did the Firepower album cover. And I can't wait for it to come out because we did a deep dive on that album cover, which is freaking great. So nice. Hopefully I keep nudging him, dude, when is this podcast going to be done? It's killer. I can't wait for it to come out, so stay tuned for that. But, so here we are all these years later. I guess KK and Les had reconnected and become friends. KK and Les had reconnected. And it's funny because we are at this gig now in 2019. And I realize this is the first gig they had done together since. So we're backstage right before the show. And as I generally do, I sort of, hey guys, come here. Sort of rally up, football huddle style. I say a quick little prayer just as a blessing to go on stage, and which I know for some people kind of blows their mind, I guess. And but it hit me in that moment, it was like, thank you, God, for mending fences, mending friendships, and bringing this history back together with KK and Les back on stage for the first time since Unleashed in the East. And we went down and played the gig and kicked ass. And, Les and I stayed in touch, and he was very thrilled that I said that prayer. Like, I don't think he'd ever done that right before a gig, right? Maybe that's more of an American thing. I don't know. And he came sometime another month or two later. We came through with Megadeth and Five Finger Death Punch. We played at Wembley Arena, and he came down to the show and
nice.
got to see each other briefly. And that was the last time that I saw him. But we'd stayed in touch a bit, would text a bit, and it had been a minute now since we had chatted. So, but what a sweet soul! Obviously, a fantastic drummer. And it was really great that I could be in the centerpiece of putting it together that reconnected two of my heroes, KK and Les Binks, from probably my favorite heavy metal album of all time, Unleashed in the East, back together for the first time in 40 years. And then from there, Ken and Les were at the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. And I'd like to think largely because of that gig we did together. So what a beautiful story. But
that's great.
My favorite heavy metal band of all time.
Yeah, that's a great story. And definitely it's awesome when you put two and two together like that, kind of in the moment. You're like, wait a minute, this is the first time they've been on stage since, the iconic record of the career.
Yeah, and to just be somehow karmically used to be in that position to do that. Super, super cool. So rest in peace.
Absolutely. Once again, thanks to Gary Holt for coming on the podcast. Make sure to check out the book, check out Exodus on tour, check out Slayer shows when they come through. And man, that was awesome. That was awesome chat with Gary.
Super great. Super great. Heavy metal day for sure today. So rock up. Yeah. See you soon.
Go.
See you.
Awesome.
The David Ellefson Show.